This week's Torah portion, called Yitro or Jethro, depends on if you're Jewish or English reader. We're going to examine the story of Yitro's timely advice to Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. And the question that comes out of this story is, why did Moses take the advice of Yitro? Why couldn't he figure it out on his own? What is it about Yitro that was so important that he accept the advice? There's a lot of questions to be asked. And one of the beautiful things about studying Torah is we're able to go to many of these great and ancient sources to read what the commentators had said about these stories and glean from it a nugget or jewel of great price. Yitro had heard that God had done wonders for Moses and Israel and had redeemed them from Egypt. He journeyed from Midian with Moses' wife and 2 sons to the Israelite encampment at the base of the Mount of God. We hear nothing of Moses' reunion with his children and his wife. I don't want to get into that, but rather a detailed account of Yitro's organizational advice to Moshe. Yitro advised that Moses set up a judicial system to alleviate the burden upon him and thus better serving the needs of the people. That Moses would teach the word of God but would no longer adjudicate small matters, that only the most difficult matters should be taken to him and brought to his attention. The remainder being attended by a judicial system populated by God-fearing men who upstanding wise men. Moses listened to his father-in-law and implemented his suggestion by doing, quote, all that he had said. So here's the next question to ask is, why was Moses so quick to heed Yitro's advice found in chapter 18, verse 24? Why was Yitro the source of the advice? Or why didn't God directly instruct Moses to set up the judiciary system? Let's explore what the commentators of Judaism have to say. Tzeror Hamor Abraham Saba states that Moses listened to Yitro's advice because he saw that his advice was brilliant, it was good, so good that Moses did all that he had said, verse 24, without adding or detracting, because his words, Yitro's words, were divinely inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh. This highlights Moses' humility, that he accepted the truth from the one who stated it and implemented it, Yitro's plan, that is, without changes. And it also showcases the wisdom of Yitro, who perceived that which Moses had not perceived, so according to what he just stated. Now, deriving lessons from Tzeror Hamor's comments is a idea that if Moses wholeheartedly accepted advice from an outsider, we too, by extension, should be willing to seriously consider persuasive arguments for improvement regardless of the source of that advice. The Ralbag, which is Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, explicitly articulates this lesson. He says, quote, it is appropriate for a person to take heed of good advice and forsake his own approach when it is not good. For indeed, Moses, our teacher of blessed memory, notwithstanding his perfection and his wisdom, put aside his own approach in the face of Yitro's advice, since it was better. In addition, Moses sensed that Yitro's advice was divinely inspired, thereby indicate that non-Israelites or non-Jews may serve as a conduit or as conduits for divinely inspired instructions, including to Jews. Tzeror Hamor continues by responding to the following implied question. Why did Yitro merit having Moses accept his advice to establish a judicial system at his behest? Tzeror Hamor opines that God wished for his advice to come from Yitro so that the Israelites would be aware of the great wisdom Yitro possessed and understand how appropriate it was for Moses to have married Yitro's daughter. Yitro was indeed wise like Moses. Tzeror Hamor highlights God's concern for Moses' reputation, lest the Israelites wonder how Moses could have married a foreign Midianite woman. By extension, like God, we too should be concerned with the reputation of others and anticipate and attempt to neutralize unjustified negative reactions to others' conduct. Or Ha'ayim states, it also asks why Yitro was the source of his advice and not Moshe. It appears to me that the reason is for God to show the children of Israel, this generation and every subsequent generation, that there are among non-Jews giants of understanding and insight. Go out and learn from insight of Yitro in his advice. The intention in this is that God did not choose Israel because of their insight and cognition, and that they were greater than anybody else in the nations. Rather, their choosing came from a chesed, pure kindness from Hashem on high, from above, and love for the patriarchs. Even though there are among the nations those who are wiser than those among Israelites, nevertheless, God brought the Jews to himself and chose them. And it is especially for this reason that it is incumbent upon us to praise the one who chose the Jews on account of God's kindness. Now we're going to look at Or HaChaim's comments in which he makes explicit what is implicit in the comment of Zechor Tahamor, that there are wise people among the nations with much insight to offer the world in general, and Jews in particular. What Or Hamor encourages individual humility, Or Ha'ayim encourages national humility. We also learned here that God chose the Jewish people not because of their particular wisdom or insight, but on the account of God's pure chesed, or benevolence, which we should acknowledge and thank God, once again extolling the values of national and individual humility and eschewing the tendency toward national hubris. Now, Arbanel, Don Isaac Arbanel, on the other hand, states, does not think that Yitro's advice was divinely inspired or especially insightful. He notes that Yitro's judiciary plan was certainly a good one, but insists that the advice given was obvious, so obvious that even the dimmest person could have figured out that it was a foolish idea for one man, Moses, to stand from morning until evening to adjudicate matters that were brought before him. And since Moses was master of the prophets and the greatest of the wise men, Moses and all the elders must have considered this idea on their own. Arbanel argues this point, who is known for preceding his comments with a list of questions. So here they are. He writes, how is it possible that Moses and all the elders of Israel did not notice that appointing judges would ease the burden upon Moses, and that no one among his illustrious group would realize that it would be appropriate to appoint judges who are able men, such as God-fearing men, men of truth, hating unjust gain? So much so that Moses listened to his father-in-law and implemented his suggestions by doing all that he said. And how is it possible that God didn't teach Moses such a simple insight as this one? According to the Arbanel, Moses actually had intended to implement a similar judicial system himself soon after giving the law a few days later. Now, this interpretation is based on the opinion that Yitro arrived before the giving of the Torah. Nevertheless, for the sake of treating Yitro with honor and respect, Moses did not reveal to Yitro that he had already thought of the idea and was going to establish it as soon as Torah, Metan Torah, the giving of Torah, would have come to he and the people. Deriving the lesson from Arbanel's comment states that at times perhaps we ought to withhold some information for the sake of honoring another person or another individual. Moses honored Yitro by agreeing to implement his plan rather than revealing that he had thought of the very same plan himself. Moses, withholding of the information, also speaks of his humility by selflessly allowing another person to receive credit for the plan that he had intended to implement himself. Although the commentators are reviewed and answered our questions to this discussion seem to be in disagreement at times, they seem to share something in common: the highlighting or even extolling of the paramount virtue of humility, be it on a personal or national level. I hope our study today demonstrates how identifying questions and referring to our traditional commentators can provide us with the opportunity to consider the values and issues being addressed by the commentators as a way to actually enhance our weekly Torah study. Now, this concludes this part of the lecture, and I want to invite you to join us weekly for live classes on Zoom. If you would like to be a part of our classes, it is very simple. Just send us an email at netivcenter@gmail.com, Netiv, Netiv, center@gmail.com, and we'll respond to you immediately. Also, take time to subscribe right there, I think. And we really appreciate it. And until next week, shalom, shalom. The second pillar is the correct order. Truth is going to have the correct order of things. It's just going to fall out in its proper order. The letters of Sheker appear in a perverted order in a sequence above that we just saw, unlike the correct order appears of Emet. Falsehood is often generated and truth violated by placing things not in their correct order. Violating correct order can appear in all forms and shapes, and we've seen it from day to day in our lives. When two warring parties are engaged in war and we ignore the correct order of the events that have basically rolled the parties into the state of war, are all times betraying real events. However, in a perverted order of occurrence, we create falsehoods, lies, interchanging cause and effect, calling cause effect, and calling effect cause, displaying thereby an incorrect cause and effect relationship, also obscure truth and generate falsehood. When a person blames his business partner for a certain adverse reaction to his own conduct, portraying his own conduct as reacting to that reaction rather than as a trigger for the latter, he is engaged in creative falsehood. Preserving correct order is an essential ingredient for preserving the truth. Have you ever had a dialogue with someone or discussion with someone and you essentially disagree with their premise, and you're so in some way debating. You're debating the issue, and then all of a sudden that individual makes a statement that stands out on its own as being absolutely factual and true. If you're honest with yourself, you're not looking to be an opposition for an opposition's sake. You actually look at them and go, "Well, you have a very good point here. I don't know what to say." That is a person seeking the truth and not trying to create falsehoods in an argument. Number 3, this is very important: supportive evidence. Observing the two sets of Hebrew letters that constitute Emet and Sheker, one discerns a major characteristic that tells them apart. The letters of Emet look stable, well rooted in the ground, as shown by the two legs or by a horizontal base is on the mem, as in the middle letter. Conversely, all letters of Sheker seem to be shaky, not well rooted at all, sort of standing on one leg and a third of the first letter, Shin, prone to swinging from one side to the other. Observing these letters, an impression is conveyed of instability, as though the letters do not really have anything to support them. One is led to the conclusion that lack of evidence grounded in reality is the main feature that distinguishes truth from falsehood, emet, from lack thereof. So if you want to know the truth, if you want to examine the truth, look at its order, look at the consistency of it, and look at last but not least, you want to examine its supportive evidence. I know that many times in our study of Hebrew, there is the term that comes up from our rabbi or from one of us, can you source that, right? This is why sourcing is so important in Torah study. We can throw out a comment, we can throw out an idea that may contain elements of truth, nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, if we really want to examine what is true, then we're going to ask for the source. We're going to know the source. Very important part. Sorry I had that graphed up most of the time. Didn't mean to do that, but you know what? One day I'll be professional like you guys and won't do those kinds of things. So in conclusion, the Hebrew alphabet teaches us that to tell the truth from falsehood, to tell truth from falsehood, one needs only to examine and confirm to what degree do the three essential ingredients of truth prevail. To what degree does completeness, correct order, and evidence permeate given descriptions of world affairs? Whenever we ask our question or ask the question, if we're examining something that seems to be quite serious to us, does it have completeness? Is the idea complete? Is it in correct order? Does it make sense? Is there some logic to this thing? And of course, is it supported by evidence? That concludes this part of my lecture. Now we're going to go into discussion. I'm waiting for a great discussion, by the way.